Hello, Pam. Thanks for that weather update. We're sorry about the rain. We're having beautiful sunshine here in Mount Pleasant.
Oh, no problem, Paula. Actually, I'm kind of enjoying it today because I can get into my jeans and my sweatshirt and pretend it's one of those cool, cloudy days up north where I just read a book.
There we go. Perfect.
All right, I think we've hit noon, so I'll go ahead and get started. Everyone should be able to see us here in the room. So I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. My name is Megan Moreno, and I am a member of the Advancement and Alumni Relations team. And I have the great pleasure of working closely with Dean Paula Lancaster of the College of Education and Human Services, as well as some of our Human Development and Family Studies faculty members who are joining us today. Just a few quick things before I pass the mic over to them and allow them to get started on the discussion. If you haven't done so already and you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat and share where you're joining us from today, please feel free to do so. Also, you are muted, but this is not meant to silence you. It just helps with feedback. We definitely encourage you to use the chat or to use the raise your hand function. If you'd have a question or a comment, we definitely want this to be a two-way discussion, and our presenters will discuss and share some things in the beginning, but we want you to feel free to join in and for this to be a two-way conversation as well. We encourage you to turn on your video if you're so inclined and you're able to do so. We'd love to see those who are joining us, and it helps to have a little bit of the feeling that maybe we actually are all together. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Dean Paula Lancaster and give her an opportunity to introduce herself and introduce our co-presenters.
Okay, thank you so much, Megan. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. And for those of you who are watching later, given the link, thank you for taking the time and coming together to talk about this very, very important topic. We hope to see and hear from all of you as we continue these events and share more and more about what's going on here in the College of Education and Human Services. For those of you whom I have not had the great pleasure of meeting, as Megan said, I'm Paula Lancaster. I'm in my third year serving as the dean of our college. I am a former special educator and teacher educator. I'm originally from a very small town in rural Illinois, but have worked in Michigan for well over 20 years. And I have to say, I am very, very intrigued about our topic today. And there are many reasons for that. One reason is that I am an advocate of simulation work in human services related training and programs. So just for a really practical reason, I'm intrigued to learn more about how simulations are used in general. But a second reason is that I don't know that much about the poverty simulation. So this is going to be a learning experience for me as well. So for many of you who are listening with us now and will be listening later, I'm excited to better understand what this simulation is all about. And I think a third reason is just a really obvious one for me, is that I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that's occurring in our Human Development and Family Studies department. We have amazing faculty members there who are continuously engaged within the community, who are doing great work to lift everyone. And we have two faculty members who we will be hearing from who are prominent members of that stellar team. So for all those reasons, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And to Megan's point, we do hope to have the conversation that we have here live be much more of a give and take. We hope that you will feel free to unmute and ask questions or place your questions in the chat as we go and just really kind of engage in that way. But I want to take the time now to welcome Dr. Jeff Angera and Dr. Jack Day, who are joining us from the Human Development and Family Studies Department, and ask them to please share a little bit about themselves, their work, both here at CMU, but also in the broader community. So Jeff, Jack, take it away.
Jack, why don't you go first?
All right, happy to. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you today. My name is Jack Day. I am finishing out my third year here at Central Michigan University. I've kind of done a whole loop of the United States. I'm not really from anywhere anymore. I've spent a majority of my life out west, but I had a postdoc in Arizona that moved to the University of Texas. I was in upstate New York just before coming here. And so I'm just really excited to have joined the team here recently. Especially, or even though it was in the middle of a pandemic, I've been really fortunate to work with such great folks. In the community, or my research is focused on school policies and school supports for LGBTQ youth and other marginalized youth. And along those lines, I've also joined a local community organization called Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Youth Advisory Council that provides educational supports, different programming for parents, for youth, for community organizations throughout the Great Lakes Bay Area. I'm still looking to get more integrated in the community in general, since I've only been here for 3 years and, like I said, started during the pandemic. But that's some of the work that I've been doing both here on campus as well as out in the community.
Thank you, Jack. So my name is Jeff Angera, and I have been here at CMU for 25 years in a couple of different capacities. I was in the counseling center for a period of time prior to my role in as a faculty member in human development and family studies. I was teaching courses during that time. I'm currently the department chair. Working through my first year, it's been an interesting experience. So. A little bit about my background. I started out primarily in a more clinical realm. My training is in marriage and family therapy. That's what my PhD is in. And so early in my career, I was involved in working on a very micro level. I actually thought I would continue and move into private practice, but then kind of my love of teaching took over at that point. But so in my past, I worked in a lot of different settings in a clinical sense at a community hospital that was largely for individuals who Medicaid recipients didn't have private insurance. I did in-home work where I was often contracted by the state to go in and work with families in instances of reunification, those sorts of things. And that was a phenomenal experience because I don't know, my phone is going off. I don't know what's going on there. Sorry about that. I was working in the home with folks in a variety of socioeconomic status class areas. I also worked in at a group home, those sorts of things. So then I came to university, worked in a university counseling center, and then have gravitated into a teaching role and have been there since 2002. 2003. So also some of my research has not been primarily in the area of poverty by any means, but more in terms of parent-child communication about sexuality, fatherhood, areas associated with teaching, scholarship, those sorts of things. So that's been more of my scholarly focus. But a lot of my individual pursuits have been associated with kind of tangentially related to poverty. I've been involved in the United Way fund drive campaign here at the university, trying to support our local agencies that are doing such important work with folks. And then I used to be in the volunteer president for the board of Big Brothers Big Sisters in Isabella County, and then that moved into the Great Lakes Bay region. And so I also am in a faith-based organization where I'm the chair of a service and justice committee, where I oversee a number of grant activities where we support local, regional, state, federal, national and international projects, most of which surround issues related to supporting those with limited resources. And so that's been kind of one of my walk the line, both professional and personal kinds of efforts. So I think that gives a little bit of background as to how I come to the experience here.
Well, thank you both for sharing your backgrounds, and I just want to be clear to the audience that both Jack and Jeff are very inclined to underplay the impact that they have, both here on campus, but also in the community. They are huge advocates and supporters of our students, as well as the organizations in which they work. So just felt the need to put that out there for you all too. Okay, well, let's get started in talking a little bit about the simulation and our program in general. So when we think about supporting individuals, families, and communities, there are so many areas in which we could focus our efforts. And you all kind of talked about some of those too, some of those areas in which you're already engaging in work. And so I'm wondering if you could give us some insights from your perspective as to why poverty is such an important area to address. And some of it's probably somewhat obvious, but we might want to dig a little bit deeper into that.
Well, I'll start a little bit, Jack, and Jack and I are going to just jump in and out. And so,
Sure.
And if anyone else has comments, please jump in and out. We want this to be more conversational. We're pretty informal, so we'd love to hear from you or your thoughts or reactions, because we're going to share in this process. We're going to share some of our dilemmas that we have in working with this simulation, and very genuinely, because we're struggling. We're trying to re-envision this after a COVID break. One of our key faculty, Dr. Katie Reck, who used to be in among our faculty, she, because of family reasons, has moved to Kansas, which has to be the reason why you moved to Kansas. I have to put that in because Paula's from Kansas. So anyways, but and so we're trying to, along with two of our other colleagues, Beth Embry and Gina McGovern, who couldn't be with us today, re-envision this experience. So one of the things I want to start with is where we are positioned here at CMU. We are in, if you would like to say, some key areas associated with poverty. We are in Isabella County, depending upon the source you see, near the top or at the top in terms of percent of individuals living below the poverty line, with about 23%. Clare County in about 20%. So we are very much positioned geographically in an area where, and a lot of I think what we are, we would describe this as rural poverty, right? Which can be somewhat invisible in some respects because of geographic distance, those sorts of things. So I think that's one thing that's really important. And we'll talk probably, I'm sure at some point we'll talk a little bit more about like our internships and our fieldwork opportunities but we're trying to prepare our students through various hands-on, the we do at CMU. Well, we're doing a variety of things with our students to try to encourage them to engage in experiences that will put them in spaces where they are dealing with issues, people at different developmental levels, and the kind of the intersection with socioeconomic status. So I think that's one of the reasons why it is very important for us here in our department. We're thinking about the importance of this area. Jack, do you want to add any other pieces?
Yeah, I think, and just to provide some further context for Isabella County, as Jeff said, our poverty rate is between 18 to 23%, depending on the source. That's a good 6 to 10% higher than the national average. So when we're talking about a high poverty area, that really is in a community that we're embedded. And for, I think, a lot of our students, they don't necessarily see that if they are primarily on campus or right around campus. It's, like Jeff said, very often a hidden problem. And it's so important for our students to gain a deeper understanding of this, because it has such a vast effect on the functioning of families as well as developmental processes. That living in poverty is all consuming. And so it's something we talk about in a lot of our classes. Before I was here, previously had a class specifically dedicated to the topic of poverty. We no longer have that class, but it's still infused in so many of the courses that we teach. So I teach a class on the roots of oppression and how that affects development throughout the life course. And key to that are economic disparities, and especially economic disparities for marginalized populations. And so the poverty simulation really helps bring some of these topics we're talking about in class to life, because there's presenting data, there's presenting videos, but really having these applied simulations or experiences, I think really help deepen students' understanding and appreciation of those topics.
And I think it's important to note as well that, you know, so context, federal poverty level is around, you know, depending upon most recent statistics, but around 12,500 for a single adult and about 26,000 for a family of four. So 26,000, that's federal poverty level. So again, I think it's important to have that context to understand where we are. And, you know, one of the things I do with my students in one of the classes, I'll try to compare, I'll use census data and try to compare two areas that are of about similar population, and then really show some of those inherent differences that are there. So I take the city of Clare, which is around, you know, a little over 3,000 people. And then I take the city of West Bloomfield, and we look at the actual per cap income and the number of people living in poverty level. And it's so dramatic for them, right? And it just points to them, because we have many students from the Metro Detroit area, for them to really see, wow, same size, right? But yet such dramatic differences and so powerful kinds of, you know, numbers can speak powerfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think it's an interesting point to make some of those comparisons, because students have the context of where they grew up and what they think about, and that's their point of comparison. But then also to think about, then how do we help them come out of poverty in the abstract, and what they've heard about it and maybe been assimilated to think about it, and have different views or different approaches. And maybe that's where the simulation comes into play. But I have to admit, I don't know much about the simulation. I haven't yet seen it in action. So, you know, there's the question now. What is it? How does it work? Can you help us understand and visualize what the poverty simulation is all about?
Yeah, and I think we'll start with just a really brief video that I think does a really nice job of showing what students are prepared for when they're going into it. We don't tell them a lot, partly because you can't really tell students, they have to experience it. So Jeff, do you want me to try to share my screen and see if that works?
That would be great. Thanks, Jack.
All right, so now you all get to watch how I struggle in real time in front of students. All right, here we go.
We're running a simulation to show individuals how it's like to live like we.
Oh, sorry, are you still able to see that video? There we go. That works better. Okay,
Yep.
there we go.
We're running a simulation to show individuals how it's like to live like we poverty. So what this is supposed to be doing is really giving people insight on the difficulties and the barriers that you have to overcome when trying to operate while you're in poverty. There is 4 weeks that are being simulated in 15-minute segments, and within those 15 minutes, all the participants have to go to different agencies and procure services they would need to be able to function within poverty. During these times, we're going to give them curveballs like unexpected expenses. They have to be able to take care of their kids, the disabled grandparents, family members, and really they have to be able to find a way to survive in poverty without having any of the resources that they actually would need.
But I will give you this.
Students really get an ability to understand the struggles that they learn about, but might not have experience. There's a lot of students that come here that might not know what it's like to live in poverty, and going through the simulation gives them the insight that they need to be able to service the people they want to service, being that most of the people in this program are in our HDF department or in our social department. Poverty is hugely stigmatized, and not having the awareness, it makes it really difficult to provide the services that you need to be able to do when you're in this kind of program. So what the poverty simulation is aiming to do is give that insight and let them understand the barriers that they have to overcome to be able to help the people that are in need.
So just to provide a little bit more insight into context of what this actually looks like, typically the way the poverty simulation would be run is you would have students come in 1 year and do it as participants. So they would be assigned to a family where they're given a specific role within the family. So I participated as a participant this last time. I was a 16-year-old who was pregnant. I gave birth during the simulation, so that was a very interesting challenge. And then we had 3 other family members who were also assigned different tasks, parents within the family as well as my siblings. And so we had definitive set of resources that we had. We could sell things at a pawn shop. We had a parent who was looking for a job and would have to go to the job agency every day to try to enroll in that. And so we were trying to navigate the different community supports we had, especially in that 15-minute period. Once students have gone through as a participant, ideally, they come in the next time and they are the facilitators. They are the one who are overseeing each of the organizations. We have faith-based organizations, childcare, social services, we have banks, we have a hospital. So a variety of, and for our simulation, we also include a casino to bring in that local flavor that we have here in Central Michigan as well, in Mount Pleasant. And so we have 15 minutes within each that simulated week to complete all of our tasks. The agencies then have to manage all of the families that they are trying to service. The poverty simulation is a little bit of a misnomer because all the families are really low middle to working class families. They're right on the cusp of poverty. And so the idea is how to show how easy it is for a family to slip into poverty and how difficult it is to make ends meet when you're just above that poverty line, where some of those government supports that do exist really aren't accessible to many families. And so it's meant to really show what it's like to live in a rural area and to be right on the cusp of surviving and being below that federal poverty line. Jeff, do you have anything to add?
I think we talk about some of the, you're referring to what we sometimes refer to as ALICE families, right? An acronym for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed Individuals. So these are folks that are living kind of on that level, so to speak. And I think we have, again, a high percentage of folks in our area. Now, in terms of the actual physical structure of the room, so we this time did the simulation in our Education and Human Services building in our French auditorium. And so the families were in the middle and then the services were located on the outside. So there's a physical component to this too. The video that you saw was, I'm sure some of you alums remember Finch Fieldhouse. It hasn't changed. New windows and better ventilation. Our colleagues in RPL are very happy they have air conditioning, but the inside of the structure is largely the same. So in that setting, students were then, and again, there's an element to the simulation to try to create, for lack of a better word, anxiety, because you have to move quickly, right? So you saw an image where some of the students, and it was fun to see that those are some students who graduated not long ago, but see them running to a table, and that's because a resource came available. They had to make decisions in that time frame about where they were going to try to seek resources, right? So there's a, like I said, this anxiety that's built in. We have to, and I have to make these difficult choices. So they're in the center and then they move. And then there's people who come in and sometimes like the landlord might evict them when they're gone to the experience. And so there's just lots, and then it draws to a close. That week of the month is over, right? So it goes quickly. Now, it's important to note that this is not our simulation that we developed. It's the Missouri Community Action. There's a kit that we actually purchased a number of years ago. And this is something that, we want to be clear that this is not we didn't generate all this, but we are utilizing it and trying to, as like Jack said, make subtle, the organization that developed the kit allows you to make subtle nuances to make it more relevant for your particular area. So hence we have the large casino here. And so that's a piece that we want to play in and make sure is a part. So like I said, there's definitely, and we've done this, and we'll talk about this probably more later, but we've done this in the past prior to the pandemic with other community members, not just students. And so it really we're trying to put people in an uncomfortable place to some extent through this process.
Yeah, and another key component of it is you have about an hour of the simulation itself. You go through 4 15-minute weeks. At the end of that period, we have about an hour to an hour and a half debrief. And that's, I think, where a lot of the work is done, because one of the tensions that we will get to a little bit later as well is gamifying poverty. And this kind of being somewhat of an entertaining event, but an anxiety producing event. And you see a real range of student reactions, and having that time after for students to really reflect on what they learned, what their experiences were, and to hear the experiences of other students is a really vital part of why it is, I think, ultimately a very successful simulation.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about that right now, because I do think that's really interesting. And we are, in this case, we are using this as an educational tool for our students. So it's clearly very complex, clearly challenging to both enact, but also probably to participate in. So how do students respond to it? What are some of the things that you hear from them, both during and after the experience?
Yeah, so like I said, we have a debrief period where all the students are mixed into groups. So you leave the family that you were in, you have one person who was within an agency, who was a facilitator, and then 3 to 4 participants from various families, so that you can talk about how you all navigate it and that navigated the simulation in those different ways. And then we bring it back to a larger group where everyone goes around and in one word says a reaction to that. And I think that really sets the tone, where you have some students who will say heavy, disheartening, but others saying entertaining, fun. And that can be really jarring, especially for students who maybe have experienced poverty themselves, to hear other students view this as a game. And once again, that's partly the design of this. So that was our first insight into how students are responding. And then we have a longer conversation where students are allowed to expand on their thoughts and really reflect on what they're taking away from it. And then Jeff, Gina, and I, in our classes, had students submit reflections on their experiences as well. So we were able to go more in depth in terms of what those students were experiencing, their ultimate reactions. And they also had the benefit of having a few days or up to a week post simulation to really marinate in those thoughts and to think more deeply about the reflections and process some of the things that happen. Because once again, when you're actually in the experience, it can be quite intense, and I think really hard for students to fully grapple with everything they've gone through.
So I'd like to pause for a second and ask if there are, Jack and I kind of went through the simulation fairly quickly. Are there any questions that anyone has about, like, how does it work, or other pieces that maybe we overlooked? I mean, when you're involved in something, you make a lot of assumptions and that sort of thing. So is there anyone, you can drop it in the chat or just do anything?
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Jack. Jerry Junkie, San Antonio, Texas, CMU alum, counseling department, marriage and family, 1986.
All right, fire up,
I'm a
Chips.
professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio, former associate dean, former department chair, former doctoral program director. I have a couple questions for you. It sounds very interesting. Thank you for doing this. In my time up at Mount Pleasant, we had a clinic over in the counseling department there in the old row hall. And we would do outreach. It was difficult because people couldn't get to campus. So one of the things we were doing is we were going to some of the schools. I think it was near Canadian Lakes. I think it was called Chippewa Hills High School. It was rather large. I had a grant called the Just Say No grant. It was Nancy Reagan. This goes back a while ago. We would go to the middle schools and we would go to the schools to do marriage and family counseling with students and their family members. And often poverty and low SES issues were very present. I guess what I'm wondering is, can you help us understand the statistical analysis that you're using and the research design you've got? Are you using, I don't know what you're using with this. Is it more qualitative than quantitative? Is it mixed methods, or what do you've got? Thanks so much for your information. Appreciate it.
So like Jeff said, we didn't develop the simulation ourselves specifically. And I should know a little bit better offhand what they used to develop this overall. This was first developed in the early 2000s and has been updated since then. My best understanding is it is based both off of qualitative data as well as quantitative data in terms of what families are likely to experience in the different agencies that are available. But Jeff, maybe, I don't know if you've done a little bit more digging into that.
No, I think there's been more, the more recent literature that's been out there is exploring the reaction of various groups who've experienced, well, for instance, like nursing education. How have training nurses, how does this kind of experience impact them in the way in which they approach school, teacher education, develop students, how has it impacted them in their role? So we at this point are not gathering any data ourselves for in this first round. We have some data from the pre-pandemic, but because of the lapse, we are going to have to restart again. So our goal is to really look at this, and this maybe get to a little bit of our later piece is I would like to look longitudinally to see the potential impact of this, whether that be quantitatively or qualitatively, to be able to determine, because this is one of our difficulties is, okay, so you have a simulation experience, right? And any kind of experiential education, and Jerry, as someone who trains in counseling and marriage and families therapy, we do lots of simulations in those environments, and to try to determine the staying power, how does this impact individuals over time, so that they've, again, we're trying to increase empathy, we're trying to increase awareness, but we're also trying to increase action, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that we would like to see. So we're still very much in the nascent phase ourselves regarding data collection, but that is at least my hope. We met just this past Monday as a team after our last simulation to talk about where we want to go, and really a lot of that I think is going to tie in with our attempts to try and engage students in meaningful, sustained actions, not one-time events, but that this could be a springboard for that.
Well, I think with the College of Education and Human Development, for teacher education, for special education, for counseling and other programs that they have, collecting that data, and I would anticipate the state of Michigan would have some grant opportunities related to education. And you would be able to easily do a pilot study, if I'm understanding what the data that you're collecting, not looking at the longitudinal, but I mean, continue to look for longitudinal impact. But what's the impact right now, and be able to talk about that. I think the potential there for grants would be significant. I just commend both of you. Congratulations. Great job.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that input too. What I was thinking as you were talking to Jerry is, my background, as I said, is in education. And I think that this particular simulation could be incredibly helpful for teachers, as most people who come into teaching right now, at least, come from a more middle-class background. So there is a leap that they're making to be able to work with students. But I can see some really nice research where we might look at what is the difference in the impact for people who experience the simulation versus those who do more traditional talking about poverty, reading about poverty, having those types of lessons in their classrooms versus a simulation. I would love to see if we can tease out some of the differences in both their depth of knowledge and empathy, but also around the skillfulness. And this is definitely an issue that we see in education, which is that when we primarily talk about instead of simulate and do, our candidates feel much less prepared for the actual work that they're going to do in the classrooms. They haven't built muscle around those skills and those things to do. So it takes a while for them to do that. They spend oftentimes their whole first year. I think it would be fascinating to run some of those kinds of studies and then begin to even dig into more detail about different components. So that's very exciting.
Oh, that sounds so exciting, because if you took this data that these folks are collecting and you just did a pre-post, you would have significant data there that you could take and utilize for a pilot study and bring that data to the state of Michigan or even the U.S. Department of Education. Here in Texas, for example, we have a lot of impoverished counties, a lot of impoverished school districts, and this really makes sense. I commend both Jack and Jeff for their dedicated work in this area.
Well, thank you, Jerry.
Thank you very much. And I think building on what Paula said and kind of circling back to this idea of what are students' reactions, in my 411 class, which is our capstone class for the family studies major, it's families and policy, a number of the students really reflect on the idea that I felt prepared to go out into the workforce and to start to do these jobs, and having to do just that one simple 1 hour exercise, they realized, oh no, I'm not prepared, right? And they have the content, but that lived experience and the idea of how frustrating it can be to be out in the field and the barriers that you're going to encounter. It doesn't encapsulate all of those, but I do think it helps students to get to more aware of many of the challenges they might start to encounter, and to think more deeply about how challenging this work actually will be for them, and to think about how they meet their own needs as well as the needs of their families. So kind of to that idea of this classroom preparation versus the simulation preparation, I think there's some really interesting ideas there to build on, because we do have some anecdotal data around what some of those impacts might be.
Another thing that go ahead, Jerry.
I was just going to say, what an impact on students. I mean, talk about their professional. If you come from a middle or upper middle class background, SES background, say you grew up in East Grand Rapids, Michigan, or Bloomfield Hills, or whatever, and you just take for granted that folks can. Now there are places of impoverishment in Detroit Metro and Grand Rapids, all over the place. But if you come in with a mindset that everybody has the same background and experiences that you have, and they can go buy a notebook for, and pen, just notebook and pen. If you think about that, many of the students can't even afford that or can't get it unless they steal it or find it somehow. These changes have such strong implications for their skills and abilities as teachers, counselors, special educators. I think that is where the real oomph of this research is.
Right. Yeah. So it would be fascinating to see if teachers, and I'm just using teachers as the context because that's my background, but you could think about any service providers really, because they're humans and they read children and families in a certain way. And I can imagine that going through this simulation will at least help them pause a little bit before making a judgment, before making a read, and think about what's happening. Because so often behavior is interpreted in a certain way, language is interpreted in a certain way, mainly because we just all come from different contexts and backgrounds. And so I just think there's a lot of opportunity here to move some dials in the right direction.
And it's interesting too, because we also have this segment of our students who are very in tune to this experience of poverty. I'm going to share just an excerpt here for a second from a couple of students. And this is where we are actually convening a group of students who've agreed to participate in a small focus group with us to talk about their perceptions of based on some of their journals, the reflection journals, but to talk about how we can craft the stimulation to make it more successful and more appropriate across the board. But this is I'll take from one student. Overall, this simulation was an experience, eye-opening and humbling. Yet it also reminded me of my childhood. My mom and I have been in experiences where it was either lights on, the cable on, food or lights, house but not lights, and barely food. My mom always sacrificed for me, and it's the one thing I'm grateful for. I was never embarrassed and still not embarrassed, but my mom taught me to use the lemons that life hands you, even if they're rotten or bruised. This simulation was a clarification for the career I want to go into. Another student said, and who struggled with this, she had some amazing, we're really looking forward to talking with her. She had some amazing comments about areas where we fell short and that we could improve the simulation. But she ended her 4-page reflection and said, as someone who has survived through a large portion of life in poverty, it felt a little Hunger Games-like at some point, doing things to make the lives of people more difficult so we could be entertained. And that's where we've run into this kind of juxtaposition. And she finished, she said, I got into my car and laughed, knowing I was heading straight to the food pantry for my weekly food pickup and probably wouldn't see anyone else from the auditorium here. So we really are getting, and there's many excerpts. There's people from largely middle class, self-reported, saying, I didn't grow up with this, but I struggled with this. And the way the simulation was run, and there again, this challenge that Jack alluded to, and what we're kind of wrestling with in the way in which we conduct this, to make that that final the wrap up, the debriefing profound. That's, as Jack said, that's where I think we can really hang the learning and really begin the process, not end, but begin the process of this simmering and letting them think about this and how it will impact their lives and impact the way in which they approach these careers that they're choosing.
and we'll probably get into this in a later question, but also just thinking more deeply about how do we integrate this simulation into our broader curriculum. When we think about what classes students are integrated into, how can we build this in a more meaningful way where the conversation doesn't stop with the simulation? So for example, think about that family policies class, thinking about the way that the simulation is structured in some ways isn't necessarily realistic in terms of how resources might be packaged within a community, those partnerships that agencies might develop. And so really expanding on those conversations and getting students to think more deeply and reflect on what could we have done differently? What might this have looked like if the agencies behaved in a different way? So both thinking of this from two angles. One, the populations that students are likely going to be serving, as well as the roles that they're going to be in, that they'll have agency in terms of crafting better structured supports within their communities.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like you could have a continuation of the simulation could be the organizations around their conference table, figuring out what they're going to do and how they're going to approach this. Yeah. I'm also thinking about another piece of research that could be for facilitators to think about and talk through and work with participants on how you balance that really authentic simulation with ensuring the dignity of all of the folks who are being represented in the simulation. And that, I can see where that's a challenge. Like we have a couple rules or norms around simulations that involve our candidates playing the role of children. So we say, yes, you're a third grader in this simulation. Do not alter your voice to sound like a third grader. We have a couple of those types of things that we say, don't do this, because it takes away from the dignity with which we want to hold a third grade child. But I often think it's not quite enough. And so I'm not sure what that kind of work entails, but we do have a question here from Megan. Who takes on the role of the agencies? Do students take on those roles as well?
Yeah, so what we did for this simulations, typically what you would do is hopefully within the first couple of years that students are here, they would participate in the simulation. And then we would re-invite them back to be the facilitators to oversee those agencies. Because the simulation hasn't been run in over 3 years, we didn't have folks who had that experience. And so for all the students there, or a vast majority, maybe there were 1 or 2 who had experiences at another time, most of them were coming to this completely fresh, which was really hard for the people running the agencies. We structured that so that people who were in our upper division classes were the ones who were in those agencies. So we identified students who we thought really could handle taking on that additional responsibility. They get a little bit more training at the beginning of the day around what to expect, what it's going to look like, and what their specific roles are. And they're really prepped to think about how they want to be, because they can choose to not be so helpful. They can choose to really make things harder, because that's realistic, right? Sometimes you're going to have folks who are less empathetic, or who might have barriers to being able to provide the support that they want to support. And then we also say, make sure that not all of you are being really extra challenging. It's important that some of you also are giving, and you have a lot of agency in terms of what you choose to do with the people who come to your services. So that is run by students, and there's a lot of individual variation there in terms of what they decide to bring to that role.
And formerly, as Jack said, when I was involved in the simulations prior to the pandemic, we had that in place, right? So it was those facilitators had a sense. It wasn't a fresh slate for them, so to speak. So that was one of the challenges we encountered this time that we hopefully want. And we were structuring, like Jack said, we have classes that we've identified. We're going to filter students through in that role. And then there's obviously students who are outside our department. We're opening, our plan is to open that up to others as well, because we want to make that opportunity as available as possible to CMU in general.
Yeah, one of my students offered that critique of, I wish there were more students from other departments and other programs in the simulation. And I wrote back, we did try. It can be hard to reach those. And so I think as we start to offer this in a more regular way, doing more outreach, because I think this is a real highlight of what we do in our department in terms of really hands-on applicable experiences. And I think it's a real strength and for students to know who we are and learn the work that we do. this is a really positive way, I think, to engage students who might not have much of an awareness of the field of HDFS in general.
Yeah. And you also do a really wonderful job of debriefing with them and holding those conversations afterwards too, which is, equally essential to this kind of experience.
Mhm.
So you sort of alluded to this a little bit, and we're leaning right into it. And I would like to spend at least a little bit of time talking about the importance of this experience for our students as they go out into their professional work, as they go into their internships. What is, so I guess, how is it applied? Excuse me. How might you see it applied? And also, what do you see as the next steps?
So I'm going to speak a little bit. I'll start, Jack, if that's okay. We
please.
have, just to orient folks a little bit, we have a 3-course sequence for our child development and family studies majors, where the first course is a fieldwork course. We call it our 19 sequence, 219, 319, 419. The first one is they're required to go out into the field and do 60 hours of fieldwork at various places that we have identified. Not exclusively, but many of them are, like, for instance, they're at the Isabella County Restoration House, which is in Isabella County is a homeless shelter. It's a traveling homeless shelter. We don't have a physical space for an overnight shelter. We have a day shelter that's open regularly, but many of our students will be there. Our students will be at Rise Advocacy, which is a domestic violence shelter, those sorts of things. So again, they're in schools, they're working as advocates and for Big Brothers, the Lunch Buddies programs, those kinds of things. So we're getting them out into the field. Then the second course in the sequence is more about planning and program development. So if they were going to be doing simulations, what would it look like, right? How would you create meaningful programs if it were around parenting or around anti-bullying campaign and those sorts of things? And then the third course in their sequence is the internship, and where they spend a more sustained time. It could be at places like Isabella County Restoration House. It could be at child advocacy kinds of centers where we're dealing with abuse and neglect. So it is integral for us to be preparing. It's extremely important for us to be preparing our students to recognize what they might be faced with if they're not familiar. And if they are familiar, to not recognize that their story is not everyone's story, right? That's kind of the way that we have to deal with this. And I think one of the things we're working against is othering, right? That we're not thinking about like, oh, those people kind of thing, that this is us, this is who we are. A bit of a quick aside, my dad was involved in, as a child, I worked with my parents at homeless shelters, and that my dad was really intimately, he volunteered on a regular basis. And I always remember what he said is, there's often there's that experience helped him to realize there's such a slim difference between him and the person he was volunteering with, right? It was a couple of bad breaks. It was lack of family support. It was an unplanned job loss. It was a car accident, a health issue, those sorts of things. And so really this kind of experience can help our students to recognize we're people. People are people. They're doing the best they can with what they've got. And so we want them involved in these practical experiences. It's part of our program. It's part of what we hang our hat on. And we think the poverty simulation can be a springboard for that, one next level. And then, as Jack talked about, taking it also from just an experience into a very academic understanding of, okay, what can we do to advocate for families? How do we change policies? What are the things that we can be involved in? It's not just knowing, it's knowing and doing to some extent. So that's, I think, one of the areas that I see is can be an extremely important part in a larger project that we're working on with our students.
Yeah, another idea that came up on Monday that I'm really excited about, and given how much time all of us have to pull this off the ground, we'll see if it actually comes to fruition. But the idea of even starting a registered student organization where around poverty, where they start to develop connections with local community agencies to build on what we're doing in 219 in a more meaningful way that's also student-led and student-driven, to begin to work with those agencies and to begin to work together in that group to think of ideas around how do we address this here in our community? What does that look like in applied work? So that they start to be able to take this from that gamified setting and starting to apply that more to the real world and have more agency over the direction they take that as well. So, I mean, we have ideas that are percolating, and I think we need a few more times under our belt to really see a lot of this off the ground. But we do have some long-term plans in terms of how to more meaningfully prepare students to translate their experience here to what they'll be doing in the field, as well as their own personal lives.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, the other thing too is that we have formerly Katie Reck, who was in our faculty, was doing this out in the community as well. She had done a number for different school districts, different agencies in the area. We recently had a contact from Alaska asking us to come and work with the court system up there. So there definitely is a demand out there, and that, like Jack said, we need to get more simulations in our belt, do this, kind of refine what we're doing, and then we might move into that direction.
So what Jeff's saying is we are going to Alaska. That's going to be
Exactly.
So I think that's what I heard him say.
Yeah.
So we do have a couple of questions. And Pam, if you want to unmute and ask, please feel free. I mean, I'm happy to read them also, but you have some wonderful questions here.
I have done vocational and educational career counseling with the economic disadvantage. It was back like in the 80s through a federal employment and training program. And I also was the director of personnel at a social service agency that provided 6 different programs to children, from pregnant and parenting teens through children who had been neglected and abused. So as I heard about the simulation, I started to feel anxious, because I can just imagine what those students felt like. And during the time that they're there in these programs, do you emphasize the importance of maintaining their mental health to avoid burnout? And can you remind them of resources that will be available not only on campus now, but when they graduate? Because they're probably going to have health insurance that covers mental health, and their employer will probably have an EAP program that they could reach out to. So just wondering, you know, how you help prepare them to take care of their mental health and not get into burnout.
Yeah.
We are intimately aware of that, and I think that's an excellent point that you make. One of the things that we did last year is we went through a curriculum mapping for our 219, 319, 419, those applied courses. And one of the things, part of what we gathered was information from students and former students, looked at different evaluation pieces that students who came through the internship program. And we made a clear objective in each of our courses, particularly in 419, the more sustained internship course, where they are developing a self-care plan. And so we talk about different quadrants, you know, physical, emotional, spiritual, just cognitive, to make sure that they are developing those plans. And then as part of our objectives, we are touching base with them. I'm teaching the internship class right now, so I can speak to this. Each one of their journals, we are, there's an element of that journal where they're talking about that self-care plan, what they're doing, how they're progressing with that. They're also, in our classes, there's a component of that where they're in, as far as the generation of the self-care plan and the monitoring, creating accountability among students, so they have accountability partners to help them to stay on track. And part of that is exploring different resources to help. We have a lot of guest speakers that come in from the field, and that's a common theme that they're talking about, is ways of recognizing burnout and ways of dealing with burnout. So I really think Pam, you've tapped into something that I think is extremely important, and that we are trying to really press with our students. And I can say, as someone, and maybe Jerry, you can comment on this, when I came through my training in marriage and family therapy, we were not talking about that very much at all. There was a little bit about the therapist kind of thing, you know what I mean? Someone you went to, but there was still, it has become much more prevalent, and how important, and we use the phrase often, you know, you can't do for others if you're not taking care of yourself first, you know, and it's not a selfishness, it's a preparation, it's a maintenance, it's a critical piece. And so I thank you for that question. I don't know if Jack, if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Pam, I think that those are such critical points. I was just kind of also struck by a comment of how stressful it was to even hear about the simulation, right? And so one thing that we do emphasize to students in that context, I think the long-term education is extremely important, but then also thinking about what impact are we having on students in our classes, in that simulation? How are we showing and displaying that care and support in those settings? Because it's also important that we're modeling that, not just telling students or educating about. They need to know what that looks like in practice. So we do emphasize that students should leave if they feel uncomfortable, and they can come to any of the faculty facilitators that are there to debrief with us and pull us aside if necessary. We did talk in our meeting on Monday that we don't think the supports there were adequate. And what we would like to do is pair with the counseling center to have a counselor there on site, to make it easier for students to know who to go to if they really are struggling. So that person can be the one that does the work to go pull one of us out if necessary. So just to provide more of those supports, recognizing how real that experience can be, and the fact that it is meant to stress students out, that is by design, but that can have some really predictable consequences as well. And we try to be prepared for that as much as possible.
Both of your, that information is really helpful, and it's really good to hear, because burnout is a factor in those jobs.
Yes.
I have one other question. I have emeritus status on the alumni board, and I have been very active in students graduating from the College of Business in terms of mentoring and participating in a variety of the College of Business programs. And my question for you is, how can alumni from these programs help you? And if there's anything that we can provide, we would gladly try to find people to come in and be guest speakers or do a panel discussion, or what you think you alumni could contribute to your programs.
I thank you very much for that invitation. You're kind of, I'm a little off guard, like, oh, I don't know. It doesn't happen a lot where people say, we've got to come in and help you. But we can definitely, like Jack said, we have a team kind of that came together Monday, and we're moving forward thinking about the evolution of this. So if it's, from my perspective, if it's okay, we would like to keep that in our back pocket and reach out to you as we start to evolve our programming. Because yes, it does, fortunately this past simulation, because we did it within our own building, a lot of the ancillary expenses are taken care of with that. But there is a person and an expense as we expand this that we have to take into account. And as budgets ebb and flow, it's really nice to have support from those who are willing to help us, whether that's financially or in person power or in other ways. So we will, I'll say as a member of this team, I'm very happy to hear that, and we will keep that in mind. Jack, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I really appreciate it, especially that focus on mentorship and guidance for students who are graduating. And I think having that strong connection to alumni is really beneficial to students to see where they can go from here. Yes. And just to be able to navigate that really scary abyss that happens. You're at this real key critical juncture of your life, and staring at that can be really scary. So the support that we receive from alumni is just so essential for supporting students while they're here, as well as they're thinking about their careers and lives ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions from the audience?
I'll just jump in with a quick comment, kind of in response to Pam's inquiry about alumni support. And I think, kind of like just facilitating this event and this conversation, the more people that know about some of these wonderful things that we're doing at the university that help train students not only for their own profession, but give them such a incredible background and perspective for how they go out and interact with people and communities, whether it's in their profession or just in their day-to-day life. I know our alumni board members and others who are involved do the best they can to be aware of all of the great things happening at the university and to share that whenever possible with others who maybe have a connection to CMU or maybe don't. And that's exactly, I think, what we need is people out there talking about the wonderful things happening. And so that's one of the reasons why the ability to do this and share with those who are on today and then those who will watch afterwards is so important, because I don't think enough people are aware of some of these really wonderful, very impactful programs that we're implementing for our students.
I completely agree. Yes. In many ways, we're far too humble in about talking about the wonderful things that we're doing. And I would say too, please feel free to share the link and push it out to others and encourage them to take a look, because that will help spread the word. And I know we've talked about a very deep subject today, and we're right at the 1 o'clock mark. I would love to end by asking Jeff and Jack to share just one thing that they're really optimistic about within the program or with students. And one thing I'm very optimistic about is reflected in these sessions that we have, and to Pam's point too, which is that we do have a fantastic alumni network and group, and so engaged, so supportive. And I'm reminded every time we have one of these sessions of how grateful I am for that support. So Jeff, Jack, any last words of just things you're excited about and feeling really optimistic about as we wrap up our time together?
Besides the term coming crashing to a close?
It is really coming crashing too.
I think, as we come out of the pandemic, and especially a very challenging time for students, and I think we're seeing this reflected in just how much anxiety the students have in general, and what they're navigating going to college in a really unprecedented time. I'm really optimistic about being able to implement events like this again. Like, for me, this is really energizing. I missed having these types of real collaborative experiences where working closely with other faculty to pull this off, and then getting to work in that different way with students and seeing how they responded and came alive in that really energetic environment. So what I'm optimistic about is just as we continue to claw our way out of where we've been for the past few years, and seeing students reconnecting, seeing them re-engaging, seeing them really thirsty for this involvement and providing those opportunities for them, that's what I really look forward to, and keeps me kind of going every day.
Excellent. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jack. And I would echo that to some. I've been here for 25 years, and I've had the opportunity to work with students over time. And I often have people, ask me like, "Oh, you work with college students. What do you think?" And there's kind of a negative connotation to the question, and I just say, I feel so blessed. I work with amazing young people. And it is energizing. I moved into this department chair role, so I have less contact with students, which I really am feeling that the void of that. I still teach, but not as much. There are great students coming in the pipeline. We appreciate alums who are willing to mentor them. We appreciate support of our programs, and I'm optimistic about, as Jack said, kind of this new start after the pandemic, getting students engaged. I think there's a hunger for that among many of them, and being able to be a part of that is great. We have to reorient them again, though, because they were at home in their PJs watching a screen for a long time. So there's a reorienting part that's a little bit challenging, but I'm excited and optimistic about that.
Yeah, I completely.
Thank you all to everyone. We really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Now we've kept you over time, but thanks for not doing that thing where you pack up your backpack and start to head out of the room before we officially dismiss. We appreciate that. But really, but thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff and Jack, for talking with us and sharing all this information. And to all of you who are here with us live and are watching later on, we do really appreciate your support and interest, and we hope to see you all very, very soon. Thank you.
Just one more quick note before people sign off. There will be a survey sent out to your email for those that did attend. Please give your thoughts in the survey. We're always trying to improve, but we'd like to hear your thoughts about today's talk. And then we will have, I believe, one more event yet this semester. So watch your email for another invitation to possibly attend another event like this on another topic for the college. So have a great day, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
hey, it's just us.